let's see here. Okay, so I'm the turf and ornamental entomologist with UF, based out of Gainesville, and my research program at UF covers anything related to insects or mites in landscapes. So if it's on a tree, a shrub, in a lawn, then it falls on my plate. And so rather than kind of talking to you all about kind of basic entomology and integrated pest management, I figured instead we'd have a little more fun and I would talk to you about some of the recent research that my lab's been doing at UF, trying to develop more sustainable ways for us to manage turf grasses and lawns and ornamental plants, and in general, plants in urban landscapes. So that's going to be what we're focused on today. We're going to talk about a few insect pests, lots of beneficial insects, and how we can leverage the beneficials to help control the bad ones, and the role of people in all of this. So here we go. All right, so I really like maps, and I think maps can be a good illustration of some of the concepts that we're going to talk about today. So I'm going to start off by just trying to illustrate to you all why your landscape and the decisions you make in that landscape are really important. And that all centers around urbanization and the rapid change that people are imposing onto Florida's landscapes. So look closely at the screen, maybe blur your eyes a little bit and watch as the landscape changes. I believe that's over about a 20-year period in the Fort Lauderdale area. Just the land use change, where lots of natural or agricultural areas have been converted to residential landscapes. And that's happening all over Florida at an extremely fast pace. So in Florida, about 80% of our 21 million residents live in urban areas, and these landscapes are the most rapidly growing land use type in the state. So 900 people move to Florida every day, and those people need a place to live, and that place to live is typically in an urban or suburban area. And so what this figure shows is the transition of land use in Florida from 2010 into 2070. So over the next 50 years or so, these red areas are what we expect Florida urban areas to occupy.
I turned it down.
So that's a lot of space. So what happens, and why do these land use changes, why are they important for plants and insects and people? Well, so those changes to the landscape, they cause a lot of changes to the local environment. And I'm going to show you this figure here, which is a little complicated, but bear with me and I'll try to walk you through it. So on this figure here, we have the process of urbanization. So as you go from a natural area to an urban area. So here on the left, we have an aerial view of a city where you can see the built landscape, the gray pavement, roads, parking lots and stuff, and the green trees, and then a ground level view of that same space. And then on the bottom here, we have what that looks like when you just convert everything to temperature, to surface temperature. So if you look here on the ground view image, you can see that plants are green and blue. They're cool. So plants naturally cool the environment. And these hardscapes, the road and the concrete parking deck, are red hot because they absorb sunlight and release it as heat. So these changes to the vegetation and changes to the climate affect the insects that live in these landscapes. And so here on the left, we've got different circles and squares that represent different insect communities. So each color is a different species of interacting insects. The circles are the predators and parasites, the good bugs. The squares are plant feeding insects. And as these organisms experience these changes to vegetation and changes to climate associated with this rapid urbanization, they respond differently. So some don't change. So the size of these shapes indicates the abundance of these organisms. Some of these don't change. Some of them become significantly less abundant in urban areas. Some of them respond differently. So in this case, predators are unaffected, but plant feeding insects become less abundant. In some cases, these groups of insects disappear altogether when you create an urban area. And then in other cases, the predators decline and the plant feeding insects become super abundant and start to cause problems. And so ultimately, what this means is that as you create urban landscapes, you wind up with biodiversity loss and herbivore outbreaks. So these are our pests that we deal with all the time. And what my research program at UF does is try to address both of these problems through integrated pest management. And hopefully, integrated pest management is a term that's familiar to a lot of you. And what I'm going to talk about today in the context of IPM is just how conservation and pest management go hand in hand and how you can really accomplish both goals with some of the same practices. So what is integrated pest management? Well, here's the long USDA definition of integrated pest management, which is too long for my taste. So what it is it's basically using multiple evidence-based strategies to manage pests with reduced inputs and reduced non-target impacts. So you're using multiple approaches to manage the system. You're not just saying, okay, I've got this pest here, I'm going to kill the pest and ignore all the other aspects of that system. And that's really what my program does. How can we manage the system more effectively and efficiently? So here we are. We're back to a map, an aerial view of a Florida city. And one thing I want you to do is just stare at this image and see what pops out to you. What are some things that really stand out and say, oh, wait, there's one of those. Oh, there's another one. Oh, there's another one. When I look at this, what pops out to me is all the golf courses that are in these urban areas. So in this city in particular, I believe this is, I think this is Fort Lauderdale. I thought I had a label on it, but what you see in this image is that there are 9 golf courses within about a 45 square mile area. And this is all within the same city. And what I hope stands out to you is that those golf courses are large, continuous green spaces in these cities that are covered in gray impervious surfaces. And from the figure before, when you put impervious surfaces in, you increase temperatures and you reduce vegetation. So you're changing these habitats, and that has effects on insects. But these green spaces have a lot of value because they're more natural spaces that have vegetation in the middle of these harsh environments. And so golf courses are valuable green spaces. A lot of times they get a bad rap because of the perceived impacts on the environment and the surrounding landscape. But there's a lot of evidence that these spaces do provide a lot of value in urban areas. Not only are they the only continuous vegetation surrounded by these buildings and roads and parking lots, but they provide a lot of services like temperature reduction, wildlife habitat, water filtration, carbon storage, and obviously they provide a recreational space for people. But there's also some research that has shown that golf courses also support more insect biodiversity than other urban green spaces. So if you compare urban gardens to urban parks to golf courses support substantially more beneficial arthropods than those other park or urban green space types. So they can have conservation value. We've got a bunch of golf courses in the United States, about 16,000 each, averaging about 100 acres or over 100 acres. Florida has more golf courses than any other state in the country. So we've got a lot of golf course acreage. And I would say we have a lot of opportunity to leverage golf courses and that space for the benefits that they can provide. If you look at that acreage on an individual course, about 67% of that golf course is turf grass, maintained turf grass. So it's mowed, it's irrigated, and has various other inputs like fertilization, pesticides, herbicides. But 40 to 70% of the acreage on a golf course is not used for the game of golf. And so there's a lot of underutilized space that's still maintained as turf grass, but not really needed to be turf grass. And golf courses spend a lot of times maintaining that space. So this is a image showing how golf courses spend their time in terms of maintenance. And this bar here on the left is just mowing roughs on golf courses. And a lot of that space is out of play. So I would argue you could really cut back on that maintenance, pure labor cost, by converting some of this out of play space to more valuable habitat. And so here's a couple of images of some golf courses in the Central Florida area, and some of the out of place space that's just an example of the underutilized but highly maintained acreage. And so one thing that my program's been really working on is leveraging golf courses as an urban conservation space. And another reason why I think this is a really valuable urban conservation space is that it has a lot of a really broad reach to a lot of people. So in Florida alone, we have about 5 million people that play over 60 million rounds of golf annually. That's a lot of people that are playing golf and on a golf course in Florida. We've got over 130,000 people who work in the golf industry and over 500 golf communities where people are surrounded by golf course acreage and land where they live. So there's immense opportunity for education, outreach, and really integrating these conservation efforts and the conservation value of these spaces with the public. Another reason that golf courses are a great opportunity for this is that they have the ability to sustain these conservation efforts. So we've seen in a lot of cases when an organization or an entity initiates conservation efforts, like they create a conservation habitat in an urban area, they'll get the grant, they'll get the project initiated, but then a year or two later they run out of money or they move on to a different project and that space just falls into disrepair. A golf course can't afford for that space to fall into disrepair because it heavily relies on the aesthetic value of that space and the functionality of it. Golf courses also often have the budget to maintain that space. So these are long-term conservation spaces that have the opportunity and the potential to really contribute to sustained conservation in urban areas. So there are a couple different areas that my lab's been working on, trying to identify ways that we can conserve beneficial insects in urban areas on golf courses and on other urban green spaces. One insect that I'm sure many of you are familiar with is the monarch butterfly. This is obviously an extremely charismatic insect that is really popular amongst the public and well recognized. But unfortunately, this thing has declined, populations of monarchs have declined by over 80% in the past 20 years. And this is a result of a variety of factors, but one of the primary reasons for this decline is habitat loss. So monarchs rely on milkweed as their host plant. So a monarch caterpillar is only going to complete its development on a milkweed plant. And so if you don't have milkweed, then you can't sustain a reproductive monarch population. So one thing that people are doing all over the place, all over the United States, is planting milkweed. Golf courses are also on board in doing this. There's a program called the Monarchs in the Rough program that's led by the Audubon, what is it called? Audubon International. And so people are planting milkweed everywhere. But one thing that's really important to keep in mind is the design of these milkweed habitats. Although just planting milkweed willy-nilly out there in the landscape can have value, but what can you do to maximize the value of that space and really make sure your conservation efforts are having the intended effect? So here's a few little tidbits that we know about monarch habitats and what makes a better monarch habitat. Because in general, there's a lot we don't know about what habitats are best for monarchs. So one, we know that monarchs prefer plants that they can find easily. So that means taller plants with larger leaves or milkweed that's visible to those insects. So I'll show you an illustration of this here in a second, but if you can find a food source more easily, then you're obviously going to more successfully land on it, lay eggs on it, and reproduce on it. You don't want to be hiding the conservation plants from your intended beneficial insect. We also know that native milkweed species are generally better hosts and more valuable hosts for monarchs. And we know that some milkweeds are more attractive to other beneficial insects than other milkweeds. So milkweeds produce a bunch of flowers. Pollinators like bees and flies and other beneficial insects visit those flowers, not just monarchs. So you can conserve multiple things at once. So here's a crazy image that shows a bunch of different dots. But what this illustrates is different garden designs. So you've got 3 different columns here. So you got A on the left, B in the middle, and C on the right. And these are different garden designs to see how garden design for a milkweed habitat influences how heavily colonized and how many monarchs actually utilize that space. So here on the left, we have milkweed. So in all these figures, the white circles with an M in the middle are milkweed plants. And then the different colored circles represent different wildflower species. So here on the left, we have milkweed planted only on the perimeter of the garden, and then all your wildflowers in the middle. Here in the middle, we have milkweed planted all together in the middle of the garden with your wildflowers surrounding it. And then here on the right, we have everything just mixed all together. And so what this study looked at was how do these designs influence how many monarchs come and utilize these habitats? And what they found was that these habitats on the left, where milkweed is planted on the perimeter of the garden, had way more monarch eggs and monarch larvae colonize that habitat and reproduce in it. And that's because they could find those milkweed plants more easily than when they're hidden amongst other wildflowers. To really illustrate this point even more directly, here's another figure from this paper where they put milkweed in an open field, and then they put milkweed in an open field surrounded by tall ornamental grasses. Just looking at those figures, you can't see the milkweed in box C nearly as well as you can see it in box B, and the monarchs respond just like that. So the milkweed that is in the open had 3 times as many monarch eggs than the milkweed hidden by other plants. So if they can see it, they will come, but if they can't, they're not going to come. So keep that in mind when you're creating these monarch conservation habitats. Another thing that I've been really interested in is what about plant diversity? So how does the number of different plant species in a monarch garden um, affect how heavily utilized milkweed is and how successful you are at conserving monarchs? So, and this is important because in general, when we create plantings, one of the most common ways of reducing pest pressure is increasing plant diversity. So we know that more diverse habitats generally support more diverse insects and fewer key plant pests. So for an example, if you think about your a turfgrass lawn where all the plants in that lawn are St. Augustine grass, and you're trying to deal with, let's say, chinch bugs are your main pest focus. If you compare a monoculture of a St. Augustine grass lawn to a lawn that's a mix of a bunch of different weeds with a little bit of St. Augustine grass, the St. Augustine grass lawn is probably going to have more chinch bugs and more pest pressure than the lawn that's a mix of all sorts of different plants because there's more food and a more readily available host plant. Same thing applies um, to any other or a lot of other plant systems. So one thing I was interested in is if you create a diverse monarch conservation planting, are you actually supporting fewer monarchs and kind of counteracting your intended conservation purpose by reducing the ability of monarchs to find the hosts and attracting other insects that might eat monarchs? So we created a bunch of habitats for gardens and field plantings, and they contain these plant species. So our main focal plant was swamp milkweed, Asclepias incarnata, and we created two different types of habitats. So we created gardens that were all swamp milkweed, and then we created gardens that were a mix of swamp milkweed with these other plant species. So blazing star, uh, uh, hibiscus, a native hibiscus species, native sunflower species, and another native milkweed species. So we created these two types of gardens. We have monocultures of one, or monocultures of the milkweed and mixtures of multiple species. And we looked at how many monarchs came and colonized these habitats, laid eggs on the milkweeds, and looked at the other insects that were attracted to these habitats. And what we found was that monarchs actually laid about 22% more eggs on the swamp milkweed and the mixed plantings, um, and that there were more predators in those mixed plantings, but that had no effect on monarch survival. So they were in there utilizing the habitat, but they weren't eating monarchs and thereby kind of contradicting the intended conservation purpose. So it seems like a diverse monarch conservation planting has value, but you want to make sure your milkweed in that habitat is visible and readily accessible to the monarchs. So back to golf courses as conservation spaces. So I think it's essential that we always keep in mind golf courses are also businesses. They've got to make money. They've got to keep their operating costs at a manageable level, and they have low thresholds for imperfections. So they're not going to want to put really poorly performing habitats or eyesores all over the golf course. And although I would argue that a vast majority of golf course superintendents are environmental stewards who are trying to provide environmental benefits with their golf course acreage, I would also argue that if there's no benefit to them other than them being able to say, hey, I'm saving the bees or saving monarchs, then the implementation of these habitats may be pretty limited. And so one thing that my lab's also been trying to do is identify ways that we can convince superintendents and other managers of urban green spaces to create these conservation habitats, and do so by showing them how it benefits them as a business. So our approach to this has been through insect pests. So we know there's a bunch of insect pests that are major problems for turfgrass management. So we've got fall armyworms, we got mole crickets, we got bill bugs, we've got white grubs. We've got all sorts of things that are out there chewing away on turfgrass and creating problems that golf course or turfgrass managers apply insecticides and put a lot of effort into controlling and mitigating. So, but some good news associated with that is there's a lot of things that eat those pests. And it turns out that many of those things also feed on flower pollen and nectar. So for example, this parasitic wasp, it's called the Laura wasp, is attracted to flowering plants. It primarily feeds on mole crickets. So it lays eggs on mole crickets, the eggs hatch and the larvae eat the mole crickets alive, and you can reduce mole cricket populations. This wasp, this potter wasp, primarily feeds on caterpillars, although it supplements its diet with pollen and nectar. As I'll show you here in a minute, if you have more of those wasps in an area, you increase caterpillar predation and reduce caterpillar populations. Other wasps, like this scoliid wasp, primarily feed on white grubs as larvae. So if you have them in an area feeding on flowers as adult, they're laying eggs and white grubs helping control that pest population. So we've got all these insects that use flowers as habitat, but also control turfgrass pests. And so what we've tried to show turfgrass managers is that turfgrass areas that are next to flowering habitat are going to have reduced pest pressure and increased biological control of turfgrass pests compared to turfgrass areas that are next to other turfgrass areas. So how does that play out? So what we've done is we created two different types of habitats. So one other here again, back to what we talked about with monarchs. Plant diversity matters. If you have a habitat that's primarily one or two or three species, how do the benefits of that compare to a habitat that has 6 to 9 species? And do you get more value from this diverse habitat than you do from a less diverse habitat? And so what we've done is we created these two different mixtures where we have a low diversity wildflower mix of 5 different species, and we have a high diversity mix of 9 different species. And there's a few important things to keep in mind here. So if you're creating a wildflower habitat or a garden of flowering plants, and you want to conserve the most pollinators and you want to provide the greatest pest control in the area, then you're going to want to create a mixture of species that flower for the longest period of time. So here in this figure, in these tables, these white boxes indicate when these different species are flowering. So in this mixture, we've got something flowering first thing in the spring. So in March, February and March, this species was flowering. And as the year went on, we progressed and transitioned from one species to the next. But there's always something in bloom, and therefore you're always providing that conservation value. So that's a goal that you should strive for if you're creating one of these habitats. And although I'm talking about large golf course conservation habitats, these same concepts apply to a small garden in your yard or around your neighborhood, anything like that. So it is scalable. So we collected a bunch of insects from these habitats to see what kind of conservation value they were providing. So a couple of my students, Rebecca and Grace, did a lot of this work where we've got these habitats and we need to see, okay, how many pollinators, what kind of pollinators, how many predators, what kind, what's using this habitat, and how does that compare to just standard turfgrass plantings that we're replacing with this habitat. So first thing we're seeing here, this is native bee populations. So how the abundance of native bees in these areas. And so what these next few slides are going to show are figures that compare our different habitats. So on the left here at the bottom, we have our turfgrass control. So those are the turfgrass plots that we're surveying insects in. Here in the middle, we have the low diversity wildflower mixture. And then here on the right, we have our high diversity wildflower mixture. And so that's what all these figures are going to look like for the next few slides. On the vertical axis in this slide, we have the abundance of native bees. And so what this shows is that we saw a drastic increase in native bee populations when we replaced turfgrass with high diversity wildflowers, but not when we replaced turfgrass with low diversity wildflower plots. So diverse habitats made a difference for native bee populations. So we had about 3 times as many native bees in the high diversity compared to turfgrass and low diversity plots. We did a very similar comparison for predatory and parasitic insects in these plots, and we saw a very similar trend. So again, as you go from a turfgrass planting to a low diversity to a high diversity wildflower habitat, you see a continual increase in the abundance of predatory and parasitic insects. But that was only significant in the high diversity wildflower plots. So again, diversity made a difference for predatory and parasitic insects. One insect group that I really want to highlight are the red and black mason wasps. So this insect was 6 times more abundant than any other insect predator in our plots. And it really utilized these pollinator hotels. So bee hotels, some people call them. These habitats are really, really valuable habitats for a variety of different organisms. So I imagine some of you have seen these bee hotels. They've become really popular over the past several years. You can buy them at the store now. You can order them online. But these habitats are intended to provide nesting habitat for native bees, solitary bees, because a lot of our native bees build nests and lay eggs in little cavities. And so if you drill holes in wooden blocks or provide these hollow bamboo reeds, native bees will come in, lay eggs, and reproduce in those habitats, and you're providing habitat for pollinator reproduction. So it can be really, really valuable. One thing that we see throughout Florida is that these habitats are also really heavily used by predatory wasps that also rely on these cavities for their solitary nests. And the red and black mason wasp is by far one of the most common colonizers of these habitats. And what does it primarily feed on? It primarily feeds on caterpillars. So you could stand in our golf course habitats, you could stand next to one of these boxes and watch these wasps flying in and out of these holes, just a constant traffic flow of these wasps flying in and out with legs full of fall armyworm caterpillars. So they're stuffing these caterpillars in these holes and sealing them in there with one of their eggs. That egg hatches and the larva eats those armyworms and then emerges as a wasp. So really great example of active biological control. So although we could see this happening on these golf courses and next to these flowering habitats, uh, we wanted to really quantify that and document the impact of that on pests. So what we did is we scattered these fall armyworm caterpillars uh, in the managed turf grass next to the wildflower habitats or next to the turf grass area. And we quantified, we left them out there for 36 hours and then came back to see how many had been eaten, um, if any had been parasitized, what happened to them. And we controlled the situation so we're only capturing the effect of flying predatory insects like that wasp. So when we did that, we did it in June and we did it in July. And what we found is that we saw up to about a 50% increase in the disappearance of caterpillars when you're next to a flowering habitat compared to when you're next to a turf grass habitat. And again, plant diversity mattered. In June, the highest diversity mixtures were the only ones that saw a significant increase in predation of caterpillars. And in July, both of our wildflower habitats showed a significant increase in caterpillar predation. And this extended to 18 meters away from these habitats, and we saw no decline in predation at that distance. So it spills over from the flowers pretty far into these managed turfgrass spaces. So in summary, we're seeing that florally rich, so more diverse wildflower habitats, whether it's for monarchs or for native bees, have value. You can increase native bees, you increase monarchs, and you increase predatory and parasitic insects when you create more diverse uh, flowering gardens. We also see that you increase pest control of important insect pests in areas adjacent to these flowering plants. So having flowers conserves beneficial pollinators, but it also conserves predatory and parasitic insects that control pests. So we're going to transition a little bit. So that's a brief synopsis of the work we're doing trying to create conservation habitats in urban green spaces and on golf courses. Another major area that my lab focuses on are in lawns in urban and residential landscapes. And so if you look at a city from above or a residential area from above, it's pretty obvious that turf grass lawns are everywhere. So turf grass lawns are ubiquitous in these habitats. And they are frequently attacked by insect pests like chinch bugs, mole crickets, webworms, and so on. And as a result, they are frequent recipients of insecticide applications from either from homeowners or from professional pest control companies. And so this results in a lot of pesticide inputs, or it results in dead and dying plants. And those dead and dying plants don't provide a lot of value. So not only do they look ugly, but they're not filtering nutrients, they're not providing wildlife habitat, they're not storing carbon, they're not doing what we plant them there to do. And so that's a problem. And it's expensive to replace your grass if you have to do that. So anything we can do to reduce insecticide inputs and reduce monetary inputs and natural resource use, that's what we're trying to do here in turfgrass lawns. So if you think about why pests become problematic in a lawn or in any kind of plant system, there's a lot of things going on in these systems that can trigger pest outbreaks and the need to apply insecticides. So stress plants, putting plants in the wrong place, coming in and disturbing that area, uh, little nooks and crannies next to a paved area, hotter temperatures, triggering pest outbreaks. And the one that we're going to focus on, that we're doing a lot of research on, is the effects of plant diversity and the abundance of host plants, and how that impacts insect pests in turfgrass lawns, and how we might be able to leverage those things. So we know from a lot of, or from other urban systems, that the diversity of plants makes a huge difference when it comes to being resilient to pest invasions. So if anyone is familiar with pest problem, insect pests in urban areas in the Midwest, um, I'm sure you've heard of the emerald ash borer and its impacts on ash trees in urban and residential areas. So this insect pest is exotic, came from Asia, and entered the northern United States around 2002. And it primarily attacks ash trees, and it has wiped out millions and millions of ash trees throughout lots of North America. And so city streets that were lined with ash trees now have no ash trees because they were only planted in ash trees. And so if those streets had been planted in a variety of different tree species, the impact of these pests would be way less because you'd still have some tree cover left that are providing a lot of value. So trees tell a dramatic story because they're gigantic and people connect to them and they live for forever. They take forever to become that gigantic. They tell a dramatic story, but I would argue that turf grass is experiencing the same exact problem, this chronic pest pressure. But you can just grow grass a lot faster, a lot easier than you can trees. And so the perceived impact is not as major as it is with trees. But turf grass lacks diversity as well. Just like those streets lined with ash trees, our lawns, our turf grass lawns, are composed of the same exact host plant. So warm season turf primarily, and this, so I'm just talking about St. Augustine grass for the most part here. It's produced, planted, and maintained as a monoculture of the same species, but also a monoculture of the same cultivar. So the same genetic material, the same genetic material is replicated throughout that turfgrass planting. And so in result, we have a increased susceptibility to disturbance, to pests, to stress, because if a pest really likes that cultivar, then it's going to come in and it's going to spread because it's got all the food it wants. And so as a result, you have more pest pressure and more risk for losing that crop. So one thing we're working on is trying to see if we can increase lawn diversity as an IPM approach to managing turfgrass pests. You can do this in a variety of ways. You can mix a bunch of plant species, you can mix different turf species, or you can mix turfgrass cultivars. And the approach that we're taking here in this case is mixing turfgrass cultivars because the plants are the same species, they look the same, they have very minimal differences in their appearance and their maintenance. And so I would see this as a very readily implemented approach to leveraging the value of plant diversity without the added complexities of changing your plant system really drastically. So here on the left, we have a multi-species lawn, and here on the right, we have a multi-cultivar lawn. And I would argue this multi-cultivar lawn looks pretty darn similar to your normal turfgrass lawn, and people wouldn't really know that it was more diverse than the conventional standard. So I'm running a little short on time, so I'm going to go through, skip a couple of slides. But what I want to emphasize here is that genotype matters. So the cultivar of turfgrass you have makes a difference. If you're trying to pick a turfgrass for your lawn, you're going to pick that variety based on how much shade you have, whether or not you have lethal viral necrosis in the area, whether or not you've had disease pressure. So you'd pick one that's more resistant to pathogens. So these different cultivars vary in their susceptibility to a variety of things. And so mixing them together should create a planting that's just overall more capable of handling stressful times. And so for the next several slides, I'm going to show you a few examples of what we're finding in this research. But the research we're doing here is based on this concept where we're comparing cultivar monocultures to mixtures of 2 cultivars and mixtures of 4 cultivars. And we're seeing how that affects insects and how it affects the lawns themselves. And these are the cultivars we're mixing here on the left. So the standard commercially available cultivars that you would find at the store. So I mentioned fall armyworms earlier. We know they're a pest of turf. So that's one we've been working with primarily. All these St. Augustine grass cultivars are equally susceptible to fall armyworms. And we have found that when they feed on a single cultivar, they do better than when they feed on multiple cultivars at the same time. So they grow into a smaller insect. They feed less on a mixture of 4. So here we have M1 is monocultures, M2 is mixtures of 2, M4 is mixtures of 4 cultivars. And in this figure, this is the percentage of a planting that was consumed by fall armyworms. And as cultivar diversity increased, the amount of plant material they ate decreased. We also see that if they have a choice, they're going to they're going to colonize cultivar monocultures compared to mixtures of 2 or mixtures of 4. So there's something about having all the same cultivar in the same spot that causes these insects to go to that spot rather than these more diverse cultivar mixtures. So we see benefits of mixing cultivars in terms of fall armyworms and pest management of fall armyworms. But what about the mixtures themselves? So does it matter which cultivars or how many cultivars you mix together? So should we mix 2 or should we mix 4? Well, what we're seeing with fall armyworms is that mixtures of 4 produced insects that were 15% smaller, they developed 3% slower, and they caused 14% less damage than when they were on mixtures of 2. So mixtures of 4 seem to have more value from a pest management perspective than mixtures of 2 cultivars. We also have seen that the presence of different cultivars makes a difference. So here we see mixtures of 2 and 4 without the cultivar bitter blue or with the cultivar bitter blue. And when you have bitter blue in a mixture, body size is about 20% less. And so these insects are smaller and they're surviving less than when they don't have bitter blue in that mixture. We also see that having palmetto or floratam in a mixture reduces the amount of grass that these insects feed on. So it seems like you can mix different cultivars and have more beneficial effects from a pest management perspective. So we see benefits from having bitter blue, floratam, palmetto, and classic in mixtures for a variety of reasons. So one of our questions was, okay, if you mix those cultivars, how does that compare to mixing all these other different combinations of cultivars? And what we see is that when you have those optimized cultivar mixture, you have less feeding and you have lower survival rates compared to mixing any other cultivars. So we're making a little bit of progress there towards how to optimize these cultivar blends for insect pest management in turfgrass. And one of my students right now, James, is working on looking at these effects for chinch bugs and how cultivar mixtures and the composition of mixtures affects southern chinch bugs, because these are our biggest St. Augustine grass pest. Another major component of what we've been doing is seeing how cultivar mixtures affect the quality of the turfgrass lawn through objective images, image analyses, but also the perceived quality from people like you and from sod growers who are really interested and have a lot of experience in evaluating and growing turfgrass, maintaining turfgrass. So we've done some projects to quantify this, and the justification for this is even if we show that mixing cultivars of St. Augustine grass eliminates insect pests altogether. If that grass looked horrible or didn't survive or performed really poorly, then the industry is not going to use that as a product. They're not going to be able to sell it, and we're not going to reduce pests on a large scale. So we've got to see if these cultivar mixtures are beneficial and are acceptable to the industry. So we're taking a lot of photos of these plots, close-up photos with this light box, drone images like the one here in the middle, and then we're doing surveys of industry professionals at field days. And a lot of this work was led by one of my other students, Brianna. So what this photo or what this slide is going to show is the quality of turfgrass plantings based on these light box images that we take over a 3-year period, comparing between these different cultivar monocultures, mixtures of 2 cultivars, and mixtures of 4 cultivars. So we have year 1 and we have year 3. This is the quality of these plantings based on a combination of color, density, and all sorts of other traits that these images measure. What we see here is that 1 year after planting, there's no difference in these different plantings, but 3 years after planting, our mixed cultivar plantings are higher quality than our monoculture cultivar plantings. That's based on close-up image analyses. We do a similar thing over a 4-year period with drone images and compare these effects. We see some similar results where the percentage of a plot that's covered in healthy turf grass is significantly lower in the monoculture plantings 3 years after planting and 4 years after planting compared to the mixed cultivar plots. So here again, we see benefits and long-term resiliency of these plantings from having mixtures of cultivars. And if you just look at these images at the top, you can see that a lot of these plots declined over that 4-year period. Some of them disappeared altogether because the turf grass died. So we saw some real effects. This kind of spells things out, breaks it down by treatment and images within each plot. And what I think really stands out here is that the composition of the plot matters. So all these plots with stars on them had the same cultivar present within them. So this is the cultivar called Captiva. Monocultures of Captiva were nearly completely dead. And if mixtures had Captiva in them, they had less plant cover at the end, but not nearly as bad as the monocultures. And this really makes that comparison. So in both of these figures, the light gray bar is plantings with Captiva, and the dark bar is plantings without Captiva. And basically what this shows is that mixing cultivars makes a lawn resilient to the disappearance of one cultivar, because the other cultivars can compensate and fill in the areas where that cultivar disappears. But if you're in a monoculture of that cultivar, then you're toast. And then the final figure I'm going to show you is this figure of the surveys from our field days where the industry professionals told us what they thought about these plantings. In 2017, they rated all the plots, mixtures and monocultures the same, and they were all acceptable. So this dotted line at 6 represents the minimally acceptable turfgrass lawn. And so in 2017, 1 year after planting, everything was good, all were acceptable. But in 2019, on average, our monoculture plantings and our mixtures of 2 fell below that minimal threshold, whereas our mixtures of 4 were still above that threshold, and the only acceptable treatment. So this suggests that mixing cultivars prolongs the acceptable quality of a lawn up to 4 years after, or 3 years after planting. So in summary, I think cultivar blends are a plausible IPM approach to pest management by manipulating the plant community in a turfgrass lawn. We've still got a lot to learn and a lot to show, uh, but this is something we're making progress towards. We currently have field plots of this study in Fort Lauderdale, Citra, up in Jay in the Panhandle, and up in North Carolina, and trying to really document regional effects on insects and plants and come up with more specific mixture recommendations. So I think this has some promise. All right, with that, that's all I've got for you today. Thank you for being with us, and I'll answer any questions if I do have any time to answer some. Thank you.
Well, yeah, I don't want to hold you for too long here, but I've got a question about that last experiment you were kind of showing us. I guess the mixes that you were using of the different cultivars, it looked like they were pretty well interspersed with each other. Like, could you get? I mean, is there any looking into if you just planted like in a checkerboard pattern or something like that, if you could get a similar effect, like in terms of having that resilience to the pests?
Yeah, so the way we planted them was, I mean, we were definitely, so we really highly mixed them. And so I'm sure you could achieve a similar effect if they're more segregated, but still mixed in a specific way. Our goal was to really try to hide that they were a mixture by allowing them to mix at every level in that plot. One of our next stages is really try to figure out how sod growers could implement that on a large scale. So the pattern and the method will really be refined at that point to see how it can be done commercially.
And so, yeah, it hasn't something where you haven't started doing this commercially yet, like, or anybody has.
Right. Yeah, we're getting close to that, but we've still got 2 years left on this really big regional research project. And so when we get all of those data together, and hopefully before we finish that, we should have a lot of evidence that will start to roll into some implementation on sod farms and commercial trials.
Cool. Okay. I've got a question here in the chat. It's from Phyllis. She said, I noticed you used all native plants for diversity. Did your study on ornamental versus for, yeah, I guess it was, yeah. Did you study ornamental versus native plants? Another question, do you recommend cutting milkweed back to the ground in November to decrease disease?
Yes. So especially, so there's concern about particularly associated with tropical milkweed and increasing the incidence of disease in monarchs. So the recommendation is to cut back tropical milkweed in the winter, since most of them will die back anyway, except tropical milkweed. So yes, recommendation is to cut that back over the winter, so you're not harboring this pathogen.
All right. Well, I don't want to keep you for too long here. I know how life is for young professors and you know,
No
like
problem.
going after that grant money. So, I mean, wherever, and I mean, so yeah, thank you very much for making time for us and giving this awesome presentation and definitely giving us some perspective into what the cutting edge is right now in terms of like all these landscape and issues in the lens of like an entomologist. So we definitely appreciate it. I definitely have enjoyed some of your other integrated pest management classes that you've done, and hopefully we'll see you again here soon at some point.
Yeah, I'd love to get down there in person again whenever we're able to.
I wanted to go back to my question regarding the ornamental versus the native plants. Did you look at or study the difference in the diversity for those as far as bringing in beneficial insects?
So we haven't done any direct comparisons with native versus exotic
Right.
flowering plants. There's a growing amount of work that is looking at that. In general, the observed effect is that native plants provide more conservation value than exotic plants.
Absolutely.
But that being said, there are a lot of exotic flowering plants that are really good and really valuable pollinator plants. So there's some good resources through the EDIS. There's some good EDIS documents that give you lists of different flowering plants for the landscape and their value for pollinators. And a lot of them are exotic. But in general, natives provide more conservation value for other insects as well.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Awesome. Thank you, Dr. Dale.
You're very welcome.
All right.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, well, take care.
Likewise.
All right. Well, I guess we'll go to the all members meeting here. And let's see here. So we'll go and give a few like updates like on the various committees. Legacy Award. If you've got any items, you can go ahead. I guess Jody.
Yeah, I know we're still working on it. That's all I'll say at this time. But I thank everybody who's participated and is participating.
Okay.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. I think we're in terms of the call it the Spring Garden Festival. I think Lee's out, but we're kind of in the early stages of getting things set up for that. I think there'll be some pretty big changes here for the next meeting or the meeting after that we'll go over. And let's see. I don't think that there's too much else. If there's anything else, let me know in the chat, but I'm going to get to my like little items here, notifications for you all.
Internet connection is unstable.
So,
Yeah.
John, could I ask a question? The plant clinic, is it open now for walk-ins or do you still have to make an appointment?
nope, everybody can walk in at this point. So, but keep in mind, we're still trying to keep everybody on the other side of the barriers, and like we still want to keep up distance with the public. But check out the emails that I've sent your way. I
Okay.
kind of covered a lot of that in more detail, like what does it mean, where we're at right now in terms of our health and safety guidelines. So people can come right in, but we're still trying to keep up some distance. And it's up to you all to, the master gardeners that are present at time to discuss one another, whether you've been vaccinated or, how comfortable you are, with the masks and all that type of thing in regard to basically like, the CDC guidelines. So just go ahead and check out that email. I feel like I covered it in pretty good detail, everything, masks aren't required here under all circumstances, but Phyllis?
Yeah, what about the pH soil test? Are we doing that now?
That should be operational next month here.
Okay.
So
Thank
like
you.
I've been having some issues with it crystallizing, and I consulted with Seminole and what they've been doing to deal with that issue. And I'm going to clear out the fridge, and then we're going to start taking soil samples from the public, and they'll be processed every Friday. So more to come on that. Yeah, and we want to start charging $2 for per sample, just to kind of keep up with basically the costs just of the buffer solution and everything, the supplies that are for that. But anyway, that there'll be more details to come on that front here soon.
Thank you.
So the question is, will the clients get a temperature taken? No, I don't think so. And the science, I've looked into this. The science on temperature taken isn't very good anyway. Like, I think that like I saw a review article on this where they tested everybody for COVID that went through a particular travel line, and it turned out that only 27% of the people that tested positive for COVID actually had a temperature too. So, I mean, it really doesn't catch all that many of the people. I know that's, like, it's one of these things that it gives us a sense of security, but in reality, it doesn't really help that much. The biggest thing is just being like keeping our distance from everybody and trying to keep the environment, keep that distance with the folks that are coming in.
John, this is Janice.
Hey, Janice.
Hey, Jerry asked me to bring in my card for the 2 vaccinations with me the next time so that she can verify. Is she doing that? Did you let people know to do that?
I need to follow up with her and see like what the deal is with all the requirements. Like, but I think that like maybe if you do that, then she won't have to check you again. You just go straight in. But I mean,
That's pretty much what she said.
Yeah, I've been told that like we should have the door open to that we should move away from appointments the way that we've been doing things here. So, but yeah, I think that like maybe try and do that. Like I've heard something about that today from Jerry, so I'll try and follow up there and give you guys some more information in a further email. So yeah, you don't need to go through. I mean, I guess, yeah, Mary Corbett, Mary Jo, I don't think that you need to, as long as you show Jerry your vaccination card. So, but like I said, I'll follow up on that. In other news, I want everybody, like I'm still going through and trying to get the forms, the annual forms to everyone. So I will email those forms out again. And please turn those in if you have not already to me. Go ahead and shoot me an email with them, and then I'll keep pestering you all until I get them all for this year, and I have an idea who's sticking with the program or not. It's been a crazy year, but I need it. If you're gonna be here, I need those forms. It's getting to midway through the year here. So, and then next item, Shalise. We no longer have Shalise here. She when it got to be time to return to the office, she decided that she was going to make a career move, and so we don't have Shalise right now. But fortunately, the process is a little sped up due to some of the measures that local government has in place right now due to COVID. So in terms of approving people, so hopefully we'll get somebody in here sooner than later. And so, but yeah, just a heads up, we're down in terms of help right now. I'm having some of the master gardeners try and help me out with some of the extra admin work. And, I think we'll be okay. So I'm getting some questions about the forms that need to be completed. It doesn't need to be sent by mail. You can email it as long as, but I'm not sure that you're going to be able to fill it out correctly, like on the PDF. Like some people are a little more tech savvy than others. if you can do it on that, that's great. Do it all digitally. I'll accept it. But if not, you can scan it, maybe take a photo of it with your phone if it has that feature for scanning, and send it our way. That is more than acceptable. So whatever works best for you. And yeah, I think if you show pictures of the vaccination cards, that'll probably be acceptable too, Phyllis. So, plant clinic, for those of you that are popping in and being here, just, I want to bring up one or two points. Always check the log, like if you can, like that we've got that Google sheet that's providing the log. Keep checking that, and also keep checking the emails, because like things can change from moment to moment, from hour to hour. And I definitely have noticed that like sometimes things can slip between the cracks of the different
Of course,
shifts.
it's lightning and
So-
thundering.
So, hey, Jody.
Yes.
Oh, hold on. I got you. I just muted you.
Oh,
So, anyway, outside of that, I will be out next week. So Ed and Tia will be around to kind of fill in, but, and then I'll come back, I'll be refreshed, and it'll be time to get ready for the rest of the year and all the next class of Master Gardeners coming through. So, next week, or next Lunch and Learn, pardon me, we'll have Dr. David Haskell. He was a professor of mine back in undergrad, and he wrote a book that was pretty well received and was a finalist for the Pulitzer Prize in nonfiction. So that should be interesting. If you want to check that book out, it's called The Forest Unseen. And I'm hoping that should be a pretty interesting perspective. I know it's a little bit on the periphery of what we deal with in like managed landscapes and then into non-managed landscapes, but that's what I like here. I come from a forestry background. I mean, it's all different levels of management. So I want you all to kind of come out with like a broader perspective on all that, hopefully. So yeah, Andrea, so just she's mentioning here that a lot of the people that are being brought into the program right now are going through and getting their hours in the clinic. They're getting their 10 hours, and a lot of them have already gotten through it. We're starting to have new Master Gardeners, and it's pretty exciting because I've been hanging out with these people in virtual land every Wednesday evening throughout much of the spring. And now I get to actually meet them in person, and they get to interact and hang out with all of you too. So they've got a lot to learn, and I definitely am looking forward to us, getting them in the ship shape here to like operating the plant clinic and being in the program. And so, yeah, outside of that, if anybody else has anything, any questions.
I have two things, John.
All right,
If I can-
Janice.
The pH, in order to make room for that, and the supplies, we moved the bugs from where they were around the corner where the scopes are. So if you're looking for the bug list with all the different bugs, they're still there, but they've just been moved around the corner. The other thing, the library, I had a couple of the newbies, the mentees, wanting to sign out the books. They are under the impression that they can take books out because they said that somebody told them, that crazy person, that somebody who always tells everybody everything. But anyway, the books are still not sign outable. That's it.
All right. Thanks, Janice. Yeah, library is only for usage if you're here. And so definitely don't give them the impression that they can go ahead and check those books out. Another thing, I guess, that's something that came to mind here is that that we are trying to go ahead and get the rest of the schedule up for the year figured out. And so we're trying to follow up right now. So we're trying to basically go through and get July onward figured out. And so there are going to be some master gardeners trying to contact some of you, and we will try and fill in the rest of the year based on the pre-COVID schedule first. After we check with everybody with their pre-COVID schedule, we will then move on to whoever has been participating in the last year in the plant clinic, opening it up to, or if you wanted a different shift and you were pre-COVID before for the plant clinic, after that, then we'll open it up to everybody in terms of where we can fill people in for the plant clinic shifts. So, but that's currently where we're at. And so just pay attention. We'll be contacting you if you have not been contacted already. And hope everybody is staying well. I'm happy to be seeing more and more folks coming through now that everyone's getting vaccinated and back with the program here too. But hope everybody stays well. Keep checking Better Impact. If you haven't set up your Better Impact account already, make sure to try and hop on there and do that as well. We are still lacking a lot of people having even signed on the first time. So go back to your old email. I've been hearing from some people that they've been having problems with it, but we're going to have to, if you do, we'll have to reset your password, but we'll deal with that as needed. It's easier to deal with in person if you are having that issue, but we'll deal with that in due time here. So I hope everybody's doing well. Have a good summer. So, we're kicking off into summer here, and I'll see you in a month, if not sooner. Signing out. Take care.